To my right, we have Christina Hobbs. Christina is the General Manager for Impact and Advocacy at Future Group. Future Group includes 5 super funds, brands that you'll be familiar, like one of the ones on the back of your chair and one of the major sponsors of this event, Future Super. Christina also has the kind of probably fairly rare accolade of co-founding her own super fund. Not something that everyone does, and Christina's like, never again. No. So Christina was one of the driving forces behind Verve Super, a super fund designed for women and to support women, and that is now one of the brands that is also under the Future Group now. On top of a phenomenal career where Christina has done humanitarian work globally, she is a powerful force for advocacy and has been behind the B75 or Business for 75% campaign, calling on the federal government to lock in at least a 75% target by 2035, as well as some of the photos we saw from the Not Business as Usual campaign as well. Phenomenal campaigns, phenomenal human. Please welcome Christina Hobbs. And we are an incredible company because our other wonderful panellist is Dr. Amba-Rose Atkinson. Thank you, Amba-Rose, for being with us, a proud Gumbaynirri Nyami from the mid-north coast of New South Wales. Amba-Rose has a PhD and she has completed it from the University of Queensland, also my alma mater, Amba-Rose, but I never had a PhD, I can tell you that much. Amba-Rose has studied the incredible relationship of health and well-being between country and mob, and how Indigenous cultural practices such as language revitalisation, which we heard from Binaway being so important, and cultural burning are not only climate adaptation and mitigation solutions, but they're also important features of healthy country. And I think that is going to be our panel. We did have a couple of other blokes, but they're not here, so we're just going to roll. Sisters. Don't ask. No, I won't go there. Ladies, thank you so much for being part of it. I'm going to start with you, Christina, only because this is your second or third Climate Action Week. What are you up to now? Third? Second. All right. And you've been involved in superannuation as a lever for change for some time. We often think about climate action as being a behavioural or a political act. Would you argue that it's also a financial one? And why is it so important?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We saw that in one of the first presentations talking about the need for investment. But I think those things really go hand in hand. I think if we look at the history of Future with Super was started over a decade ago as the only superannuation fund that didn't invest in fossil fuels. And at first that was what it was. It was, let's get out there, try to get members, make noise, and convince other funds that they need to take this into consideration. They need to take climate into consideration. And that started happening. But over time, as the fund grew, we suddenly realised we had a pretty significant amount of assets. So we now control around 18 billion, which is small for a super fund, but it's still a lot of money. And so a lot of what we're using that money now for, or thinking about how to use it, is things like, starting, seed investing in some of these community-based assets, or, even thinking through the First Nations communities, how can we get more capital into the control of First Nations communities to support sustainable-based investment. So definitely the actual financial side is really important, but this is only possible and we're only able to shift the capital that is in super. So there are over 4 billion now invested in super. We can only shift that capital and get the mindset of the industry to shift because consumers themselves are starting to switch funds and have told their super funds that they care about this. So it's a real nexus of consumer-based behaviour alongside the work of a lot of advocates that have highlighted climate concern in relation to finance and financial risk is now starting to shift these big funds.
And what shocks most people when they start to learn about where our money goes in superannuation investment?
I remember a campaign we did a while ago, and it was after an event like this, but it was a more, the audience was more environmental groups. And afterwards, we sort of set up a little booth where people could come in and say who the super fund was, and then we were sort of saying things like, okay, well, you're invested in, Santos, you're invested in the expansion of this particular mine in the Liverpool Plains, and people were really shocked. And I think part of that is, and a lot of what we've done over 10 years, is trying to get people to understand that their superannuation is an investment, because you can't drive that consumer-based behaviour to drive industry change if people don't actually understand that their superannuation is an investment. So a lot of it was just that understanding that this is something that you can control. You can make a big difference by where you invest, what you tell your super fund when you leave, or how you direct your super fund in terms of asking them to take these considerations into account. But it all started with that kind of engagement that people saw that this was something that they actually could have an active choice over.
And is ethical investing something that we should be thinking about because it's the right thing to do, or because is it got good returns? Like, am I just going to be donating my money and hoping it's good, or are we actually seeing that ethical investment has some real skin in the game?
Yes, I think something that's interesting about superannuation is that you've got this whole kind of layers of regulation that mean that you're always investing in financial interests. So something that I found really interesting was just how different your investments could look whilst you're investing in members' best interests. But if you actually took a lens of, wanting to do things that were good for the climate, so, investing in renewable infrastructure instead of other types of infrastructure, there's a lot you can do that is in members' interests financially as well as being in climate interests, but it takes that interest and curiosity to seek out those opportunities. I think the other thing is that, we've seen research out of Oxford, Harvard, that has shown that over the long run, ethical funds have tended to outperform. But, ethical funds, they perform very differently to traditional funds. So, when we see moments when commodity prices are high, so when we see fossil fuel prices being high, typically ethical funds aren't performing as well. But when we see big shocks in the market, like COVID, or those other big moments, we actually tend to see ethical funds outperform. Yeah.
Amazing. Amba-Rose, I feel like I was a little bit kind of, I overreached before because I sort of said, oh, you got a PhD, and it's not because you're not amazing and speaking to you, but you are also quite young. I don't know if you're comfortable in sharing how young you are, but when did you get your PhD, and can you tell us about the work you've been doing? And Binawee led this, I swear. She's like, I'm so proud of you, this isn't phenomenal. But do you get that a lot? Do you get judged by the older mums and aunties around you? Underestimated, perhaps?
Well, firstly, sorry, that threw me. I'll just start by acknowledging country. I'd like to, acknowledge the Gadigal peoples of the Aurora Nation and introduce myself as Nayam Amba-Rose, Nam Gumbangir Nyami, Nanadimimiga, Gumbangir, Thangari, Banjalang, Nanadi Babaga, Kabi Kabi Yinabara. It was so beautiful meeting Binawee earlier. There's nothing.
I think you've been adopted.
It's just looking up to strong black women that have come before me is my inspiration, and I think I might look younger than I am because I don't know. I just take the guidance of community. Like, if I'm still called Bub, then I'm Bub. If I'm called sis or auntie, then I'm sis or auntie. Like, it's just whatever community, the role that they want me to play, because I truly see my role as in service to my community, to culture and country. Was there a question?
Look, it was more just a broad brush statement. How about I give you a question so it's a little easier to follow my train of thought. Your PhD, tell us a little bit about it. It's about the health and connection of climate and country. What does health look like when you're talking about First Nations perspectives, or particularly maybe for your mob?
Health is, well, I'll start by country means everything. Country is life, and so health is life, health is country. I wrote 80,000 words. I really just saw myself as like the connector of the different stories of the mob that I spoke with. My whole thesis is their story. It's their relationship to country. I went to mum's community, so mid-north coast, dad's community, southeast Queensland, and I just asked mob, like, what does country mean to you? I interviewed 18 mob and it produced 40,000 words of story. You could call it data, but it really was story. It was so rich and detailed, and really speaks to, you know, in so many like environmental, climate, even health discourse, it's like Indigenous knowledges are the solution, they're vital to this narrative. It's not the knowledges themselves, it's the relationship. It's so much deeper than just understanding like when our knowledge of our waterways or our plants or our community structures. It's how we relate to all of these things and the interconnections between all of that. So health is country, and country is everything. If we're not actively doing everything in our power, in our sphere of influence, whether it be individually, locally, globally, we're not looking after country in a way that is going to be around for the next 65,000 years. I'm a very proud Aboriginal woman, and I can say that my people have been here for at least 65,000 years. Can we look at each other in the eye and know that we're going to be here for that amount of time plus more, and in a way that is generative, not extractive, that is respectful for the dignity and rights of country and people and everything that exists within that.
What do you see the impacts when people are disconnected from country, Amba-Rose?
I am going to sneakily reframe that question and look more so at what are the systems doing that are disconnecting people from country. If we're talking about climate, we're really talking about colonial and imperial systems that have deliberately disconnected a people from place in order to benefit from the resources that that place has. I'll just preface, country is not a resource, country is a living, breathing entity, and yet it is treated as a resource by the dominant structures that we currently live in. Both in Australia, but also globally, we're seeing this fractured relationship severely reduce levels of biodiversity. We're seeing this fractured relationship produce emissions that are putting holes in our ozone layer. We're seeing when you disconnect a people from place, and that severance is what is driving the fundamental foundations of your society, you can see the pickle that we're in right now. So when you look at how these systems operate, one of the first things that happened in so-called Australia was the disconnection of Aboriginal people from their traditional lands. It's the disconnection between language, it's the disconnection between families, it's the disconnection between looking after our sacred sites and our places that give us our whole identity. It's the disconnection of spirit to each other. And so when you have that and you build an entirely extractive relationship on top of it, it takes a lot to undo that. And I try not get too... I think my anger is definitely justified and my emotions are valid. But I think we really have to look at what can we do to improve this fractured relationship. You can see it playing out between people and place every day. So how can we start to mend that? And I think I'm a really bad person actually to be asking what should we do locally, because I'm very like global systems thinker. That's just my preference. But I think it really has to start with self. And understanding like what is our sphere of influence beyond self, and how is it connected to the entire global planet? You know, I'm Gumbaynggirr, we have mutton birds that would migrate from our shores to the Philippines. So if they're going over to the Philippines and they're not cared for there, they're coming back sick. Everything in a blackfella worldview, everything in an Indigenous worldview is connected, nothing is separate. What was the question? Sorry.
I think you did it very... That's it.
Oh, yeah.
And in a wildly awkward way that maybe would have been filled with a couple of other speakers that I could have done this huge kind of segue between finance and country. I'm going to try. Chrissy, hearing Amba-Rose's perspectives and, wisdom, how does that sort of embed your resolve to do better with what we have in our current system, the way we use our money and our currently our resources? What does that do, hearing what Amber's just shared?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is thinking from a superannuation perspective, right? And I think it's acknowledging that superannuation operates in a certain culture of capitalism with rules and regulations. So it's sort of what can we do within that to drive change? I think one of the first things, or one of the key things we're focused on, is how do we actually get more capital into the hands of First Nations people, people that have like land title rights of that land, so that they can actually have ownership over the assets that they control. I think many people in the room would be pretty shocked if they really understood how hard it was for First Nations people, even if they have land rights, to actually access capital that would allow them to build assets on their own country. So often instead, or what's happening almost widespread across the country, is that they're given some kind of payment for the operation of those assets, even if it's renewable energy infrastructure, or they're given, percentage-based ownership where they can't exert any influence and control. I think that the more and more we can see that people who are from that land can actually take managerial control over those investments, we'll see that projects are done in a more sustainable way. And I would say that in this country, we're really, really in the beginning phases of that. If you look at a country like Canada, there's really good infrastructure around helping First Nations people to own assets on their own land. There's significant ownership of assets that are on First Nations land controlled by those people. So I think that's an area we can do more. And I think as a superannuation fund, we can actually have direct control over helping, really start and build on the work that First Nations people are doing. I think also, really thinking through what, to the extent that we can within regulation, how we are investing. We've seen where this goes really horrifically wrong. We saw a few years ago now, I won't name any names, but a really large fund, there's people in the room that worked on this, where there was an opportunity for really significant ownership change, billions of dollars investment to transition Origin Energy, for instance, towards renewable energy, a more sustainable way of operating. And, one of Australia's, if not the largest super fund in Australia, blocked that because they were directly betting on a world where we're going to see 2+, 3+ degrees of change. And they said, we think that world's going to happen. Therefore, we think it's more profitable to allow Origin to continue its use of fossil fuels. And that's a mindset that is purely about profit, but it's a really kind of pessimistic mindset as well. And I think, there's opportunities to, I guess rethinking how we're looking at investments of what financial interest means more broadly beyond, are we betting on, this horrific world happening? If so, we invest in it. To, well, actually, we want to take a bet on, humans changing course a little bit and having a more sustainable world. Therefore, how do we invest in a more sustainable way?
All right, one final thing from both of you.
Sorry, can I just add to that
go
comment? Canada, First Nations peoples in Canada own 20% of Canada's electrical infrastructure, which I think is, and I'm sure First Nations peoples from Canada can obviously speak to that much better than I can. I'm sure there's a lot of cons to it as well as pros. But I think what it speaks to is the power of First Nations peoples leading everything, but leading markets and transforming societies. So before, when I was speaking about sort of fractured relationships, I do see an opportunity for First Nations peoples, for mob in Australia, to be transforming fundamentally how we operate. But there's a lot of barriers that Christina, you spoke about as well, like access to capital. So much of investing in mob is seen as high risk. We don't have well, in some cases we don't, in a lot of cases we don't have high balance sheets, or if we do, it might be like, for example, some mob have 600 million in balance sheet, but they can't actually use any of that for project development because it's a statutory account and has to remain in perpetuity. I think there's a really huge opportunity right now to actually transform. The market itself is quite nebulous. It responds to value, it responds to incentives and demand. What would an Australia look like if First Nations peoples were driving what that was shaping and driving what that value is, and how that influences how our market operates in Australia? So it's looking at, historically, Australia's economies have come through fossil fuel, from mining, from development, agriculture, and all of that has been built on the disposition of mob from those lands. So what would it look like if we were not propping up an extractive market, which is literally putting us in this pickle that we're in right now, but a truly like a relational market that responds and is protective, that stewards country rather than destroys it? To do that, you have to have First Nations peoples leading in these high opportunities. This is just my perspective, of course. This is not I don't want to be, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone, just my own like internal thoughts. But looking at renewable energy, looking at carbon, looking at the emerging nature repair, mob are already doing world-leading practice through carbon, through the Savannah fire method. Imagine if giving birth on country was a nature repair method. Imagine if revitalizing language holds the keys to country. It's our library. Language is one of the first things that is disconnected. When we revitalize that, we understand what country is supposed to look like. Simply planting 1,000 pine trees might not do anything for biodiversity. It's probably actually going to drive it away. It's truly knowing, what does that country type need? What is the identity of that? And it might look like ironbark. It might look like bloodwood. It might look like many different trees, and understanding what are the species that rely upon those trees, what are the waterways that are connected in. It's knowing all of that. So I really see as mob leading these markets as a way to shape our future. So I think finance plays a really critical role in that. And I think you need financial actors to understanding that and seeing it as an opportunity as well, not as like a high risk. Of course, things are going to happen, and like mistakes will probably happen, but it's taking the bet that First Nations peoples know what it is that they're talking about when it comes to talking about country, culture, and community, and that's time evidenced by our 65,000 years. I think really combining finance, mob, climate. When we talk about climate, it's not just like the weather. We're talking about country fundamentally. And technocratic solutions are not going to solve this crisis. It's, going back to the relationships between people, place, and ultimately planet.
I don't need to say anything else. Can you please thank our amazing panel, Amba-Rose Atkinson and Christina Hobbs.